My name is Harley Garcia, and today I'll be analyzing a poem called The Origin of the Species, published in a series of selected poems called The Blue Hour of the Day by Lorna Crozier. The Origin of the Species is an allusion to Charles Darwin's novel, The Origin of the Species, discussing his ideas on evolution. This poem is Crozier's perspective as an advocate of creationism, being a Christian, and also as an advocate of nature or smaller voices in the world that are not always heard. Crozier serves as a spokesperson for perspectives that she believes are missing from stories, oftentimes that is a female or animalistic point of view. This is a quick preview of the annotated notes that I've taken in my preparation time, as this is a practice for the individual oral commentary. I know that there are too many notes to understand all in one reading, so I'll break them up and discuss them when their point of relevance comes. Please feel free to pause this video if you're interested in viewing my raw annotations. This poem is based on the perspective of creationism in response to evolution. That being said, I have come up with a developed theme of fact and theory carried out through the main usages of allusions, visual imagery, juxtapositions, and scientific and biblical diction. However, the beauty in Miss Lorna Crozier's writing is that she leaves the interpretation up to the reader. Therefore, with this theme as a correspondent, the reader is then able to decide which of the two is fact and which is theory. Furthermore, this poem is influenced and inspired by the first few chapters of a novel titled All the Pretty Horses, written by Cormac McCarthy in 1992 when he was 52 years old. Cormac McCarthy is an American novelist, playwright, and screenwriter of post-apocalyptic genres. These genres denote or relate to the time following the biblical apocalypse. All the Pretty Horses is a novel about a young boy riding horseback for miles to meet a radio broadcast preacher while turning over obstacles to find out that he's been living a life that doesn't feel like his own the whole time. Lorna Crozier and Cormac McCarthy are around 15 years apart in age, meaning that she might have perhaps seen this movie or read this book out of interest because she is a strong believer in collaborative learning and inspiration through various works of literature, which then further explains her interest in advocating for the Bible's perspective. After all of this contextual information, you must also know that this poem is written in a chronological sequence, which helps support her argument both for and against evolution, as seen in the scientific background behind a main motif essential to evolution in this poem, which is time. This poem consists of 11 stanzas of 3 lines each and is a free verse poem. You could also point out, after reading The Origin of the Species, that the speaker seems to be very free-spirited, as Crozier mentions wind running and self-contained figures. Therefore, I have identified a tone of independence throughout the poem. Before beginning to analyze, it is first important that Crozier's usage of scientific diction in Eohippus is first understood to avoid confusion. Eohippus is a former name for Hyracotherium, which is the earliest fossil ancestor of the horse, a small forest animal of the Eocene epoch, having 4 toes on each front foot and 3 on each back foot. Eohippus is also the mammal of the family Equidae and belonging to the order of Perissodactyla. We could go on and on about this, but that wouldn't help you understand this any better, so let's do it the literary way. Let's first break up the prefix and suffix of Eohippus. Eo is a prefix of a Greek origin meaning early or primeval. Hippus is a suffix of a Greek word, hippos, meaning horse. Now, with this out of the way, we now have to understand that since the entire poem is based on this Eohippus, a horse, the horse is symbolically divine and independent in its own self-contentment. Beginning with the title of the poem, The Origin of the Species, we know that in literature the title of the poem only denotes the topic of the poem. Immediately we know that the poem will be about the topic of either evolution or creationism because these are the 2 platforms that Crozier and Darwin stand upon. However, the theme represents this adversity, not the title, which is the allusion to Darwin. As I've previously pointed out, the theme is fact and theory. The first stanza is a fragment of a line from Cormac McCarthy's novel, All the Pretty Horses. The significance behind this chosen piece of the novel is that it was completely intentional. An advocate of nature, Crozier chose a quote that would effectively portray her feelings toward nature and her spiritual beliefs, as it is directly related to God and nature. God would not permit for there to be no horses in the world. When analyzing poetry, it is important to know that the first and last lines written are the most important ones in the entire poem because they show the author's first thought and the last one they want us to have. That being said, Crozier leads off with drenched with dawn. Dawn is an important word in this poem. Her chosen diction is directly tied to our consistent motif of time, which in dawn means daybreak, first light, beginning, or immersion. Crozier then says the word Eohippus, which we have established is the first ancestor of the current horse, which she then compares to a fox, smaller than a fox. Crozier purposely included this to remind the reader of the evolution that we have undergone in the last thousands of years, when the horse was the size of a fox. Her visual imagery helps us to see this as compared to Darwin's evolutionist perspective. Referring back to the first line of this stanza, connecting it to the third line, dawn is the daybreak, first light, beginning, or immersion of chaos, which immediately changes the tone from peaceful to independent. The next line in the third stanza of the poem is particularly interesting because Crozier takes a different approach even as an advocate of creationism. We know that in creationism, God first made man, but in this reference of the Eohippus as a divine figure, she refers to the horse as a she twice, and explains how her hoofprint sends water droplets flying through the air. Yes, visual imagery, but more importantly, the female makes the first move, which is very uncommon. Continuing on, Crozier further explains the idea of these water droplets through her chronological sequence of the miracle occurring when water droplets make grass. Please take special notice of this spiritual diction used to describe the grass because it will return again as an important symbol later on in the poem. As supporting evidence, Crozier includes the words meadowed the desert as an example of juxtaposition to emphasize how much of an effect that divinity has on the world and nature as a whole. The next line, for centuries, again refers back to our motif of time and Eohippus, which is a major component of evolution in this poem. Crozier also includes that the Eohippus has been satisfied and self-contained for centuries because it was independent. Self-contained meaning she is complete, having all needed things in herself, not depending on the influence of others. The next two stanzas are strictly visual imagery, which helps to describe the evolution of the Eohippus in terms of the sequential order of the poem. Now ready for the wind implies that the evolution has prepared her, the horse, for the wind and discusses further adjustments even more. She's become a visible version of the wind. As a free verse poem, the seventh stanza carries on into the eighth stanza where the Eohippus is finally referred to as a horse, representing a final or continuing transition in the evolution process. This is also the first place that Crozier identifies the horse joining the wind in independence, which then ties into the next stanza about both the horse and the wind alone. However, this stanza alludes back to a previous idea that I asked you to remember. Grass is identified as a miracle and is again being identified as something spiritual, the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are found in the book of Matthew in the Bible in verses 5, 1 through 12 at the beginning of Jesus' first sermon on the Mount of Olives in Old City, Jerusalem, when he gives a series of 8 blessings. Beatitudes mean supreme blessings, therefore grass is being compared to both miracles and blessings. After establishing how the Eohippus or horse was free of influence by others, Crozier includes how the horse can still be free of restraints, no rope or bridle. Or Crozier can be seen as reflecting on a time when the horse was free of restraints prior to evolution, which can then be indirectly related to the fall of man. Finally, Crozier finishes this poem with one of the most powerful lines in it, but leaving the final word up for interpretation to the reader. However, not before she refers back to the first mention of dawn by using a polytopiton to express this motif of passing time, and again by saying a long ago beginning. Again, one of the beauties of Miss Crozier's work is that she leaves the last line up to interpretation by the reader of saying nothing broken or in need of breaking. However, my own interpretation is that the pattern of self-contentment should potentially remain unbroken. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. Thank you for listening to my individual oral commentary.